She's not just a Hollywood legend. She is an Academy Award-winning force of nature, a woman whose golden smile and unshakable spirit once defined an entire era of American cinema. For decades, Goldie Hawn dazzled audiences with laughter, grace, and brilliance, standing tall as one of the most beloved icons of her generation. But behind the sparkle of fame and the warmth that made her America's sweetheart lies a story far more haunting than the public ever saw. A life marked by broken vows, cruel betrayals, and heartbreaks so deep they nearly shattered her soul. At 80, she remains a symbol of resilience, yet her private world was scarred by 2 marriages that dissolved in anguish, children torn apart by the bitterness of divorce, and an endless search for love that slipped through her hands again and again. These wounds did not fade with applause. They lingered like shadows, gnawing at her in silence, reminding her that even the brightest stars can be consumed by darkness. In this video, we'll open the hidden chapters of Goldie's journey, the promises that crumbled, the betrayals that cut deeper than any critic's words, and the haunting price of chasing love in a world that crowned her a queen, but never gave her peace. Before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. What does Goldie Hawn mean to you? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate her? Not just as an actress, but as a woman who endured the unbearable and still found the strength to shine? Audiences would one day see her as the woman who seemed to have it all: fame, beauty, and love. But Goldie Hawn's search for love began in a childhood where affection often felt uncertain, where fear clung closer than comfort, and where even the promise of safety could vanish without warning. Born on November 21, 1945 in Washington, D.C., just months after the end of World War II, Goldie came into a world celebrating peace. Yet inside her own little heart, there was no peace at all. Her father was a band musician, her mother ran a dance school, and from the outside, the Hawn family seemed ordinary. But for Goldie, every day carried an undercurrent of dread. She would later confess that as early as age 5, she lived in constant fear, so afraid of loud noises that the pop of a balloon could send her into tears, so anxious about losing the people she loved that she never truly felt safe. "I had to make people laugh so they wouldn't see my fear," she admitted years later, revealing the heartbreaking survival strategy of a little girl who turned comedy into a shield against loneliness. By age 10, she was already performing in her mother's studio, dancing with a bright smile painted across her face. Yet inside, she carried a private ache that no applause could silence. She feared abandonment so deeply that even leaving home for school filled her with panic, a cruel reminder of how fragile love felt in her young world. In her early teens, while other children were carefree, Goldie was already battling sleepless nights, gripped by what she described as a pit of worry that never let go. It was tragically ironic. The girl who looked like sunshine on the outside was, in truth, shadowed by unbearable storms within. That haunting mixture of fragility and charm shaped her forever. The laughter she spread was genuine, but it was also a mask, a way of holding back tears no one was supposed to see. Her childhood became the silent rehearsal for her adult romances, learning to give joy to others while hiding her own pain, craving stability yet bracing for loss. And even as she learned to dance and act, even as she began to blossom into the young woman who would later conquer Hollywood, she remained a child who felt that love could be taken away at any moment. It is heartbreaking to realize that behind every dazzling performance of her youth was a frightened little girl desperate for reassurance. Yet what makes her story even more extraordinary is that she refused to let those shadows define her. Goldie turned her fear into fuel, her longing into art, her fragility into a kind of magic that the world could not resist. Out of a childhood marked by anxiety, uncertainty, and longing for love, she built a career that lit up generations. And while those early wounds would echo painfully through her relationships, they also gave birth to the resilience that made her not just a Hollywood star, but a woman who learned to survive heartbreak and keep shining against all odds. Audiences would soon know her as the golden-haired girl whose laugh could light up a nation. But in the mid-1960s, Goldie Hawn was still just a 21-year-old dancer in Washington, D.C., carrying stage fright and private anxieties like a hidden weight. She taught ballet in her mother's small studio, picked up jobs as a go-go dancer to pay the bills, and dreamed cautiously of something more, though fear often told her to stay small. Yet destiny was already setting the stage. By 1966, she had moved into the orbit of television casting directors, and within a year, she caught the attention of actor Mark Goddard, then famous for Lost in Space. For the young Goldie, their meeting felt like fate. She was insecure, unsure if she belonged in Hollywood, while Mark was a familiar face, steady and reassuring. Their romance began quietly in 1967, at a time when Goldie was still unknown, and for 2 years they built something tender away from the cameras. Later, she would confess in interviews that she had always been afraid of being left behind, and in Mark's arms that fear softened for the first time. "I was such a fearful child," she recalled decades later. "I cried at the drop of a hat. I was scared of so many things." For a girl who grew up believing love could vanish without warning, his steady presence felt like water in the desert. But as the decade drew to a close, her world changed with cruel speed. In 1968, she landed a spot on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and almost overnight she transformed from an anxious dancer into America's newest sweetheart. Her giggly, wide-eyed innocence made millions laugh, yet the pressure was crushing. Success, dazzling as it was, carried an undercurrent of loss. The brighter her star burned, the more fragile her love became. Mark remained anchored in the routine of television, while Goldie was swept into a storm of fame that demanded every ounce of her energy. The more the world adored her, the lonelier their relationship grew. By 1969, the romance had unraveled, not with shouting or betrayal, but with the quiet, merciless ache of two hearts pulled apart by forces larger than themselves. For Goldie, it was devastating in a way few ever knew. She had finally found affection that steadied her deepest fears, only to lose it at the very moment the world was celebrating her rise. "I always had this fear of being left," she admitted, and Mark's departure carved that wound even deeper. It is heartbreaking to imagine. The young woman America thought was carefree was secretly mourning the first great love she could not keep. That cruel twist, love slipping away the instant success arrived, would haunt her for years. And yet, in true Goldie fashion, she did not allow despair to break her. She poured her heartbreak into performance, masking sorrow with laughter that made her even more magnetic on screen. Out of the tender collapse of that first romance came a resilience that would define her entire career. Goldie Hawn stepped into the 1970s adored by millions, an Oscar on the horizon. But behind the golden smile, she already understood a brutal truth. In Hollywood, the price of fame was often paid in love lost too soon. By the early 1970s, Goldie Hawn seemed to be living inside a Hollywood fairy tale. At just 24 years old, she stood on stage with an Academy Award in her hands for Cactus Flower, her golden smile dazzling the cameras as though nothing in the world could touch her. To audiences, she was the embodiment of joy itself, the carefree, wide-eyed ingenue whose laughter could lift a nation. But the cruel truth was that while the world roared with applause, her first marriage was already collapsing in suffocating silence. She had wed Gus Triconis in 1969, a fellow dreamer who once walked beside her when she was still unknown, hustling for small jobs, teaching ballet in her mother's studio, clinging to hope that maybe, just maybe, something brighter lay ahead. In those early years, they were partners in both poverty and possibility, a love bound by the simple act of surviving together. But as Goldie's star catapulted into the stratosphere, Gus remained rooted on the ground, unable or unwilling to follow her into the glare of the spotlight. What began as tender companionship began to sour into distance, jealousy, and unspoken resentments. By April 1973, just 3 years after the world first crowned her America's sweetheart, they were separated. Yet the divorce dragged on for years, leaving Goldie trapped in limbo, a rising star who went home each night to an empty bed and a marriage that existed only in name. It is almost unbearable to imagine. The very night she held her Oscar, her marriage was already gasping for air. Millions watched her smile on television, but no one saw the tears that followed when the lights went out. She would later confess that success often felt more like isolation than triumph, and that the man who had once whispered forever had become a stranger at her side. The final blow came when Gus demanded a $75,000 settlement, a sum she called painfully unfair, a cruel insult from a husband who had given her little support during their years together. For a woman who had grown up fearing that love could vanish without warning, this was betrayal carved in stone, proof that even the most sacred vows could dissolve into cold bargaining chips. "I always feared being left," she admitted years later, and with Gus, that fear turned into reality she could not escape. But the heart, no matter how wounded, still reaches for comfort. In the aching void Gus left behind, Goldie tried to mend herself through fleeting romances. In 1973, she was linked with Ted Grossman, a stuntman whose rugged courage offered her a temporary shield from the storm. Their time together was brief, little more than a fragile shelter. But for Goldie, it mattered. In his arms, she remembered for a moment that she was still wanted, still capable of being cherished. Yet just as quickly as it came, that comfort evaporated, leaving her more alone than before, her longing sharper, her heart even more aware of its emptiness. More lasting, though equally fragile, was her romance with Swedish opera singer Bruno Wintzell. Meeting in the mid-1970s, their love seemed at first like an escape from the wreckage of her marriage. They worked together on The Girl from Petrovka, then fled into Bruno's Scandinavian world of saunas and icy plunges, chasing laughter and warmth as if the past could be erased. For Goldie, these were rare moments of bliss, fragile stitches across a wound that never truly closed. And yet, even this romance slipped away by 1975, another cruel reminder that in her life, affection seemed destined to be temporary. Each love began with promise and ended with the ache of absence. The irony was devastating. America saw only the glitter, the charm, the golden-haired starlet lighting up every screen. Behind the curtain, she was a young woman staggering under the weight of heartbreak. Her marriage shattered, her attempts at healing dissolving into fleeting embraces, her deepest childhood fear repeating itself in real time. Each burst of applause only sharpened the silence waiting for her after the curtain fell. It was as if fate had struck a merciless bargain. Fame in exchange for love lost too soon. And yet, she did not break. Goldie carried her anguish into her art, transforming heartbreak into humor, sorrow into the sparkle that audiences adored. Out of the ashes of a marriage that ended in bitterness, and romances that dissolved like sand through her fingers, she forged a resilience that would define her for decades to come. By the time her divorce from Gus Triconis was finalized in 1976, she was one of Hollywood's brightest stars, beloved, envied, admired. But the golden smile that enchanted millions now carried hidden cracks, scars from promises broken and betrayals endured, scars that no applause could heal. For behind the laughter the world celebrated was a woman who had already paid the cruelest price of all, discovering that in Hollywood, love often vanishes the very moment success arrives. But even as Bruno's laughter faded into memory, Goldie's search for love remained restless, almost frantic. By 1975, she was caught in a whirlwind of success, adored by millions yet more alone than she had ever been. It was during this fragile moment that her name became linked with Italian actor Franco Nero. Their time together was little more than a whisper, brief, fleeting, a rumor that came and went. But for Goldie, it carried its own kind of sorrow. This was not love in the way she had once dreamed of it. It was distraction, an attempt to silence the emptiness echoing inside her. For a woman who had grown up terrified that affection could vanish without warning, to find herself grasping at something so temporary was both tragic and telling. What should have been the season of triumph, an Oscar winner at the height of her early fame, was instead a season of wandering, of patching heartbreak with moments that never lasted. Each embrace dissolved almost as soon as it began, leaving her lonelier than before. The irony was cruel. America saw only the glitter, the charm, the wide-eyed ingenue with a laugh like sunlight. But behind that golden smile was a woman so afraid of being unloved that she clung even to the shadows of affection. Franco Nero was a fleeting chapter, but his presence underscored the painful truth. Goldie was not looking for passion, she was looking for relief. Relief from the silence in her home. Relief from the betrayal of a marriage turned into a courtroom battle. Relief from the nagging voice inside her that whispered she might never find the permanence she craved. And when that brief connection slipped away, it left her with nothing but the echo of her own fears. By the end of 1975, Goldie had lived through a cycle of glittering success and private despair. Her first marriage had ended in bitterness. Her attempts at comfort with Grossman and Winsel had slipped away, and Franco Nero had been little more than a reminder that sometimes even beauty and fame cannot shield you from the hollowness of the human heart. She was, in many ways, more fragile than the public could ever imagine. And yet, fate was about to deal her another card, one that promised love, family, and belonging. In the final days of that same year, she met Bill Hudson, a man who would sweep her into a marriage filled with passion, children, and, ultimately, heartbreak of an even crueler kind. It began like a storybook, the kind of whirlwind romance that made even hardened Hollywood insiders believe in destiny. By the mid-1970s, Goldie Hawn had already been separated from her first husband, Gus Triconis, for years. The marriage long broken in practice, though still lingering on paper. Then, on a winter flight in late 1975, 30-year-old Goldie locked eyes with musician Bill Hudson, and something electric passed between them. Almost as if fate itself had been waiting for the right moment, that same season she finalized the legal end of her marriage to Gus. The timing felt symbolic. One chapter closing at last, just as another burst open with dazzling force. Bill was witty, charming, and utterly smitten with the golden-haired star whose laugh was already becoming famous. Within weeks, the two were inseparable. By New Year's Eve, she was engaged, and in July 1976, at 31, Goldie stood hand in hand with Bill as they exchanged vows, believing with all her heart that this time love would last. Fame, romance, a husband who adored her, and soon children. It seemed she had finally outrun the shadow of abandonment that haunted her childhood. The dream unfolded quickly. Their first son, Oliver, was born in September 1976, when Goldie was still glowing in the afterlight of her Oscar win. 3 years later, in April 1979, she gave birth to their daughter, Kate. To the outside world, the picture was perfect. A superstar mother, a handsome father, 2 beautiful children. Magazine covers beamed with their smiles, as if America's sweetheart had at last found her happily ever after. For Goldie, it felt, for a fleeting moment, like the safe, whole family she had longed for as a little girl might finally be real. But perfection was only a mirage, and behind the smiling photographs lay tensions that grew sharper with each passing year. As Goldie's career soared into the Hollywood elite, Bill's music ambitions stumbled. He was 32, watching his wife's star rise while his own dreams dimmed. What had begun as admiration turned into bitterness. He felt eclipsed, overshadowed, and Goldie felt the shift like a weight pressing on her chest. The man who once promised to be her partner now seemed resentful of her every triumph. She later admitted that success often felt like isolation, and within her marriage, that isolation became unbearable. The cracks widened. Bill accused her of wanting an open marriage, a claim that shocked and humiliated her. Goldie denied it, insisting it was his jealousy and lack of understanding that poisoned what they had. But the words hung in the air like poison. Nights once filled with laughter turned into arguments that ended in silence. By 1980, when Goldie was 35, the love story that had begun with such fire was collapsing under its own weight. Bill filed for divorce, and by 1982, it was finalized. What shattered was not only a marriage, but the dream of a family Goldie had fought all her life to create. The devastation went far beyond her own heart. Oliver was just 6, Kate only 3, when their parents split. Bill remarried quickly, building a new family. But in doing so, he left Oliver and Kate behind, first in presence, then in affection. Birthdays passed without calls, holidays arrived without him. Goldie, now a single mother, poured herself into raising her children while holding the weight of their unspoken questions. Why doesn't Daddy come? Why doesn't Daddy stay? She tried to fill the silence with love, but some absences are louder than words. The wounds lingered into adulthood. In 2015, on Father's Day, Oliver, then nearly 40, posted a searing message on Instagram. Happy Abandonment Day. The words were brutal, but they came from decades of missed birthdays, broken promises, and an invisible absence that shaped his childhood. Bill responded in anger, publicly declaring that he no longer considered Oliver or Kate his children. For the world, it was tabloid fodder. For Goldie, it was an echo of her deepest fear. I always feared being left, she once confessed. And now, not only had she been left by a husband, but her children had been left by a father. The betrayal cut across generations, a scar carried by her son and daughter, the very two people she loved more than anything. Kate, now a star in her own right, has often spoken of her complicated feelings toward Bill. She refers to him as her biological father, not her dad. In interviews, her voice carries the weight of decades of disappointment. She describes watching her mother laugh for the world while holding the burden of raising 2 children alone, calling Goldie her true anchor. For Goldie, hearing her daughter speak those words was both a testament to her own strength and a heartbreaking reminder of how history had repeated itself. The little girl who once feared abandonment had grown into a mother watching her own children live through the same wounds. The tragedy of her marriage to Bill Hudson was not simply that it ended. In Hollywood, marriages end every day. The true cruelty was its collateral damage. The children caught in a storm they never asked for, the scars left on innocent hearts. Goldie's dream had been simple: to give Oliver and Kate the stability she never knew. But the reality was far harsher. By the time she was 37, she was both mother and father, star and caretaker, laughing for millions while crying in private. And yet, as always, she endured. Goldie turned her pain into resilience, her heartbreak into the humor and sparkle the world adored. She raised Oliver and Kate into dreamers and artists, determined that their father's absence would not define their worth. She taught them to dance, to create, to find joy even in sorrow. She refused to let bitterness consume her, even as betrayal pressed against her heart. Out of the ashes of her second marriage, Goldie became more than just America's sweetheart. She became living proof of survival, a woman who could be abandoned, betrayed, and broken, yet still rise with grace, still hold her family together with nothing but her own strength. By 1982, when the divorce papers were signed, Goldie Hawn was both one of Hollywood's brightest stars and one of its most wounded souls. The world saw the golden smile, but few understood the price behind it. The heartbreak of a marriage gone wrong, the silence of children waiting for a father who never came, and the cruel lesson that even love wrapped in vows could vanish without warning. If Gus Triconis had left her with the sting of disillusionment, then Bill Hudson left her with the deepest scar of all, a scar etched not only into her own story, but into the lives of the children she cherished above everything else. By the late 1970s, Goldie Hawn was one of Hollywood's brightest lights, a woman whose laugh could lift a room and whose timing made America feel lighter than it was. Off-screen, though, her search for love had turned fragile, even perilous. When gossip columns began linking her to Warren Beatty in the late 70s, it wasn't just noise, it was a storm. Beatty was legendary. His charisma could tilt a room, and Goldie later acknowledged how powerfully she felt that pull. Their connection was electric, but it came with a shadow. She was still, on paper, Bill Hudson's wife. The whispers were merciless. For audiences who adored her wholesome glow, the suggestion of wrongdoing was hard to swallow. For Goldie, the reality was harder still. Desire fighting duty, loneliness masquerading as freedom, a private reckoning carried out beneath the brightest lights in the world. The thrill was real, but so was the guilt, and the cost was a fresh layer of scrutiny that clung to her name like static. Under Hollywood's unforgiving gaze, even tenderness can look like transgression, and the line between being seen and being judged disappears. By 1980, as her marriage to Bill unraveled in public and in court, she reached for steadiness, something human, simple, safe. For a brief season, she found it with French actor Yves Renier, 1980-1981. He wasn't a headline magnet. He was thoughtful, earthy, almost old-fashioned in his gentleness. Friends remembered how, in small ways that mattered, he helped with little Kate, then still a toddler, offering the kind of presence that Goldie's fractured home life couldn't always provide. Those moments were precious. Dinners without cameras, the quiet ritual of bedtime, laughter that didn't need applause. But love that begins in the rubble often inherits the cracks. Arguments returned, resentments bloomed, and the same pressures that had broken other bonds began to press here, too. When it ended, the silence was heavier than before. Because this time she hadn't only lost a partner, she'd lost the fragile hope that her children might finally have a steady figure to lean on. In 1981, she tried to soften that silence with Victor Dry, the suave entrepreneur whose world spun at a different speed than the studios and soundstages. Their romance flared and faded quickly, a flicker of attention, a reminder that she was still desired, still seen. But desire isn't belonging, and when the flame went out, it left a familiar chill. Every brief love sharpened the same realization. The safe harbor she craved still wasn't on the horizon. Then, in 1982, came Burt Reynolds. Working together on Best Friends, they slipped into a whirlwind that felt almost cinematic. Two seasoned stars with matching sparkle, trading banter that blurred into affection. He would later speak of her with real fondness, and she, in turn, kept that chapter filed under sweet. But both knew what the cameras couldn't fix. Timing is its own law in Hollywood. Work pulled, life tugged, and what might have been a warm, steady glow remained what it was. A brief light that faded with the closing credits. Looking back, those years read like a string of near misses. Passion shadowed by scandal with Warren. The hopeful steadiness with Eve giving way to the old arguments. The sleek distraction of Victor evaporating into air. The honeyed, honest kindness of Bert ending before it could deepen. To the public, she was the golden-haired miracle who seemed to have everything. In private, she was a woman walking out of theaters into the kind of quiet that hurts, measuring herself against a question she could never quite silence. Why does love slip away just when I reach for it? Fame could fill stadiums with laughter. It could not silence the loneliness waiting when the lights went down. And yet, bruised as she was, she did not grow bitter. Each ending taught her something about boundaries, about honesty, about the difference between being admired and being understood. The pattern itself became the pain. Short chapters, abrupt exits, lessons paid for in tears. But the pattern also became preparation. Because somewhere beneath the tabloid storms and the carefully poised smiles, Goldie's heart was doing its hidden work, refusing cynicism, insisting on tenderness, learning to tell real shelter from a passing glow. By the close of 1982, at 37, Goldie Hawn had survived 2 broken marriages, a string of romances that never lasted, and enough public judgment to crush a softer soul. She could have grown bitter, could have locked her heart behind iron doors. And yet, she didn't. Somewhere deep inside, she still clung to a fragile belief in love. Not the glittering kind staged for cameras, but the kind that endures at the breakfast table, that survives long silences, that does not need contracts to prove its truth. That belief would become her salvation. In 1983, fate brought her back to a man she had first met 2 decades earlier, Kurt Russell. They crossed paths on the set of Swing Shift, and this time, the timing was mercifully right. Kurt was playful, steady, unpretentious, a man who looked past the Hollywood starlet and saw the woman beneath. On their very first date, when Kurt leaned close and told her she looked beautiful, then suggested they go dancing, Goldie later recalled. That was our first date. It felt right. After years of love affairs that felt like storms, thrilling but destructive, this one felt different. It wasn't lightning. It was a harbor. What grew between them was not a whirlwind, but a foundation. Goldie, once accused of chasing doors that never stayed open, found peace in the constancy of a man who asked for nothing but her presence. They chose not to marry. A marriage license doesn't guarantee love, she explained, but their devotion outlasted nearly every marriage in Hollywood. In 1986, their son Wyatt was born, and with him, Goldie's world shifted again. This time, the family did not fracture. It flourished. Kurt did more than love Goldie. He healed her family. Oliver and Kate, still aching from Bill Hudson's absence, suddenly had a father figure who never walked away. Kate has spoken of this with luminous gratitude. Kurt is the father who showed up. 6 words, but they carry the weight of a lifetime. For the children, Kurt's presence was the antidote to abandonment. For Goldie, it was the miracle she had long prayed for. Not just a partner for herself, but a man who chose her children as his own. Life with Kurt was not about the sparkle of premieres, but about the ordinary joys Goldie had always craved. Family dinners, ski trips in the snow, laughter echoing through a warm kitchen. They worked together on films like Overboard, their chemistry spilling across the screen. But the truest story unfolded behind closed doors. While tabloids searched for scandals, Goldie and Kurt quietly built 4 decades of loyalty. They celebrated milestones, endured losses, and raised children into adulthood, never needing a wedding ring to validate what they lived every day. Love, they showed, was not a promise made once, but a choice renewed each morning. Even decades later, Goldie still reflects on their bond with awe. Staying together is about not walking out, she said simply. For a woman who had spent her childhood fearing abandonment by her father, by husbands, by lovers, that sentence was everything. Kurt had done what no one else had. He stayed. Through fame, through failures, through the shifting seasons of life, he remained. The healing went deeper than Goldie herself. She had feared her children would inherit her own wounds, that they would grow up marked by absence. Instead, she watched them grow strong beneath Kurt's steady love. Wyatt, their son, speaks with pride of being raised in a home where laughter and stability walked hand in hand. Oliver and Kate, though scarred by their biological father's absence, became resilient, grounded artists who credit Kurt with teaching them what family truly means. Looking at Goldie now, in her 8th decade, it is impossible not to feel the weight of that triumph. Here is a woman who endured betrayal, scandal, divorce, and the agony of watching her children cry for a father who never came. And yet, she refused to surrender. In Kurt Russell, she found not a fleeting blaze, but a steady flame that has burned for more than 40 years. Their love is not a Hollywood fairy tale. It is something rarer, something harder. It is proof that even after decades of heartbreak, a woman can find the home she always longed for and keep it. The smile that once masked her pain now tells a different story. It tells us that healing is possible, that love, real love, may not come when you demand it, but it can arrive when you still dare to believe. Goldie Hawn's life is not defined by the men who left, but by the man who stayed and by the family they built together. After a lifetime of broken promises, she finally found the one promise that was never broken. And in that promise, she discovered the rarest treasure of all, love that lasts. At 80 years old, Goldie Hawn's smile shines with a light that is deeper than youth or fame could ever give. It is the smile of a woman who has walked through storms and still chosen joy, who has been broken and still chosen love. To the world, she remains America's golden girl, the actress whose laughter once lit up the silver screen. But for those who look closer, her story is more than entertainment. It is a testament to resilience, to hope, and to the belief that true love is worth waiting for. From a childhood marked by fear and uncertainty, to marriages that collapsed under the weight of fame and betrayal, Goldie knew the sharp edge of heartbreak more times than she ever wanted. She endured the sting of abandonment not only in her own life, but in the lives of her children, watching as promises dissolved and fathers walked away. For many, that would have been enough to close the heart forever. But Goldie never stopped believing. Even in her darkest hours, she carried a fragile flame of faith that somewhere, somehow, there was a love that would not leave. And then came Kurt Russell. Not a rescue, not a savior, but a partner. A man who saw her not as an icon, but as a woman. A man who loved her not for the roles she played, but for the person she was when the lights went out. Their love was not sealed by contracts or crowned by spectacle. It was built in the quiet, ordinary moments, raising their son Wyatt together, sharing dinners at home, supporting Oliver and Kate as though they were his own. For Goldie, who had once feared that her children would inherit the same abandonment she had carried since childhood, Kurt's presence was the miracle she had always prayed for. He stayed. And sometimes, that is all love needs to prove itself. Their partnership, now more than 40 years strong, defies Hollywood's odds. It is not a fairy tale in the way tabloids write about love, but something rarer and more profound. It is proof that commitment does not require a wedding ring, only the choice, every day, not to walk away. Goldie once said, "Staying together is about not leaving." Simple words, but after a lifetime of departures, they carry the weight of everything she has lived. For anyone who has known heartbreak, her story carries a quiet promise that love may not come when you expect it, and it may not look like the stories you once dreamed. But if you keep faith, if you keep your heart open even after it has been broken, love can still find you. And when it does, it can heal not only you, but generations. Goldie Hawn's life is not defined by the men who left, but by the man who stayed, and by the family they built from the ashes of broken dreams. To see her smile now is to see the proof that healing is real. Love, real love, is not about the first chapter. It's about the last one, the one that endures. And Goldie's last chapter is not tragedy. It is triumph. Goldie's journey reminds us that love is never out of reach, no matter how many times we've been broken. Do you believe, like she did, that true love can still arrive when you least expect it? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story. Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.